comfortable sending your children to school? Do you think your children will be safe at school during these uncertain times? Join me in a conversation with clinical psychologist Surinder Bal, who will share with you how you can manage your anxiety and share that same management skills with your children. Hello, I am Rajitha Bommakanti, registered nurse, faith-based holistic coach, and founder of Healthy You Lifestyle Center. If you want to develop healthy habits for life, one step at a time, then click the red subscribe button and the bell icon now. Back to school is an exciting time for children. After all summer being at home, they are so excited to go back to school to see their friends. And some fear is very, very normal for them, for younger children. They don't want to leave their parents. And for older kids, it might be because of their academics, and also seeing some of their friends after a long summer break. But either way, they are excited with a little bit of anxiety, tied into it. But this year, it has been different because of our current situation with the pandemic and the COVID-19. The fear within the children of going back to school, of all the changes that they have to follow and do, and if they're going to be safe at school or not. And also on the parents, they are very anxious to send the children back to school because of that unknown is what really bothers, and that's the what is most anxiety provoking than anything else because of that unknown. So what can we do to help ease the comfort of the parents and the children as they are going back to school into this new year of their school year to learn and have fun with their friends and enjoy their time with the teachers? Tell me in the comments below, what are some of the anxiety-provoking discussions that you guys are having at home? What are some of those signs and symptoms your children are showing? And how about you as parents? Your anxiety level, that unsureness that you have within you, unsettling feeling. Tell me in the comments below, how are you coping with that? And what is that you're feeling as you're preparing your children, sending them back to school? Now, let's welcome Surinder Bal, who will shed some light on how you can cope with the fears that all the parents have in sending their children back to school. All right, let's welcome our counselor, Surinder Bal. Surinder, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Hi, Rajitha. Thank you. Yes, I'm a counsellor. I work out of my own private practice in Alpharetta, Georgia.
All right. Thank you for joining us today. I wanted to talk about, now that the schools are opening back up, the school year is starting, and in normal circumstances, it's an exciting time, going school shopping, getting all the backpacks and everything, getting ready for the new school year. This year, we are in a different situation with the pandemic and the precautions that we all have to follow. Um, so, can you share a little bit about that? Some parents are anxious about sending their children back to school, in person teaching, and children are feeling a little bit of anxiety with that too. So, what is that? How can they manage? And between that, the anxiety of the parents and their children, and try to balance their life.
Okay. I think, the anxiety is obviously very high at the moment because of the unusual situation. And really, for parents, there's anxiety both sides, whether the kids are going into school or whether they're staying at home, because obviously staying at home and being online has also created its own sense of anxiety and issues. But of course, the decision to go in is also creating that too. And so no situation is the perfect solution. And of course, that's what creates anxiety, because we're dealing with that. I think the first thing I would say is to look at anxiety and change your relationship to anxiety. So the first thing to do is to realize that anxiety really is all about being out of control, not being able to manage a situation that's up there that in some way or another is proving to be threatening to you. So we feel out of control. And really what we want to do is to bring control back to us. So we want to look for ways in which we bring control back to us, what we call the internal locus of control as opposed to external. And then I think really it's about leaning into the anxiety. So it's not trying to avoid it and hope it'll go away, or just being worried about it, but really leaning in and saying, what is it that I'm actually anxious about? What is it that's making me anxious? And of course, dealing with yourself first is the most important thing, because your children are going to look to you. Less about what you say, more about what you do and how you handle things. And so it's really, I think, first of all, turning into yourself and saying, where am I with this? What is my anxiety? How do I deal with my anxiety? And so it's about sort of saying, okay, really then leaning in and beginning to evaluate that anxiety. And so the first thing is really, I'm anxious about my children going back to school. And so then saying, okay, what part of that, what I'm worried about, is in my control to change and manage? And looking at that, and you could even write it down on a paper, and that's a good way to do it. What part of that is in my control? And so what can I do about that? And then actually do it, address that, because you've got ways that you can take precautions or whatever. And then the other part is, what is out of my control that I'm anxious about? And then writing that down. And that really then comes to, okay, if it's out of my control, I can't do anything about it, then I'm the one that needs to have a different relationship to that, as to how I manage the fact that I am not able to change that. And so that comes down to kind of accepting things and reframing things. And so the first instance really is to look at, what are my symptoms? What is it that I'm, what's happening to me? What is this anxiety that I'm actually dealing with? And very often people have, well, I say actually anxiety kind of happens at 3 levels. And we as counselors, do address it at 3 levels. So first of all, we have the symptoms, which are often, emotional sort of symptoms of feeling uneasy, distressed, worried, and so forth. Then maybe we might have some physical symptoms as well, of feeling agitated, maybe not sleeping well or eating well, and those kind of things, kind of a racing mind as well. And that. So the first level, we can actually manage those symptoms. And it's of course the things like deep breathing, meditation, exercise, distractions like finding other activities to do, and so on and so forth. So that's what I call managing symptoms. But of course, that's all we do, is we just reduce the symptoms. And if that's enough for you to be able to do that, then that's fine. But if you still find that the symptoms you're having and you're still worried and anxious about this, then really we kind of go to the next level of anxiety, which is about reframing and getting this anxiety into a perspective so that it can be more acceptable, more manageable for you to deal with. And that is really sort of what we call cognitive behavioral therapy, which is, changing your thoughts, which then change your experience and your behavior. So it's really then sitting down again. You can use a pen and paper and say, okay, what are my worries? What are my thoughts related to this? And that's identifying what those negative thoughts are, and then challenging them and saying, okay, where's the evidence that this is actually going to happen? So for example, my child is going to get COVID when they go to school. And really then perhaps saying, okay, what is the incidence of the transfer rate? What are all the precautions the school is taking? What are all the precautions my child is going to take? And so on and so forth. So what is the real chance? Is my worries, valid to that? So we're kind of challenging our thoughts and things. Another way may be to look at the bigger picture as well. Again, what does this mean in the bigger picture of things? My child staying at home, what are all the issues related to that? My child going to school, what are the risk factors, really risk factors? What are the gains for my child? What are my child's ability to cope and so forth? So we kind of get things into perspective, because often with anxiety, we blow things out of perspective. So it's bringing it back into perspective. Another way then is really to I guess really it's most of that is just reframing. And also things like even writing down what are the positives, what are the negatives, and seeing that actually there are more positives than negatives. And so that kind of puts it into perspective. Or looking at successes and failures and things like that. So all of these kind of things, having a gratitude journal of what you appreciate about that, which then helps to compensate for the things that you feel you're losing or you're worried about. So all of these kind of things are geared towards reframing and putting things into perspective, so that we get it back into control. It's always about bringing things back into control and us having more control over the situation. And then really the third one is, if you're really struggling to get on top of all of this and deal with it, then that is probably, you're probably dealing more with generalized anxiety. And there I think, it's good to understand that there are probably other underlying issues that are relating to your anxiety. Sometimes a lot of underlying issues that have been long-standing or whatever can actually come into it, and they're really the ones that are creating this level of anxiety. So there is a time when you have to then maybe get help and address those issues. So that becomes the third, deeper level of dealing with that anxiety. And those kind of things may be that you've always perhaps been quite an anxious person, or you've always seen things more on the pessimistic side, or maybe there was a level of confidence that you may not have always had, or maybe there are other issues going on in your life that are creating conflict, and this is just another one that's overwhelmed. So those would be the sort of next layer. So to deal with it in one way, it doesn't always work, but to understand those.
Okay. Yeah. So can you expand a little bit in the beginning what you said, understand your relationship with anxiety? Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
Well, that really is that, I think anxiety, when we feel anxious, again, it's that we're out of control, we don't have the ability to manage, and we want to avoid our anxiety. We want to do things that help us to avoid it completely. And so really it's about saying, okay, I am anxious for a reason, and to embrace that. And anxiety can be a good thing as well. Anger can be a good thing. Fear can be good. These are all emotions that come up that help us to understand that we need to do something different, and that what we're doing at the moment perhaps is not going to serve our purpose. So if you are anxious, our tendency is really just to sort of avoid it and to become overwhelmed with it. So the first thing is to sort of get that courage and sort of lean into it. That's the bit. And to begin to say, okay, I'm going to address that anxiety. I'm going to lean into that. And to consider that that's something that prompts you to do something different. Does that sort of answer your
Yeah,
question?
yeah. And you were saying it would help for people to write it down.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe like have a big poster or something as the thoughts are coming, you're writing it down, so that you can see the big picture of
Mm-hmm.
where people need to adjust or shift their thinking. Is that what your
Yeah.
suggestion?
Yes, definitely. I think one of the things that with anxiety is that there's a lot going on in the head and the thoughts are really racing, racing, racing. And of course, through that, then, that affects we feel it in our body and we feel it in our emotions. And while we're feeling it in our body, our mind is really racing. And a part of anxiety is to calm that mind down, because how else are we going to get control over that mind? So it is really about, again, gaining control, bringing calm to the mind so that we can think clearly. Because when our mind is racing, we can't think clearly. The solutions aren't coming. We're feeling out of control. So if we can calm our mind, then we have the ability, the space to actually think clearly. And one of the ways we do that is to actually take whatever's in our head and put it onto paper. It brings out the sheer contact of paper, pen, and our body also helps to ground us as well. That's a very grounding exercise. So that in itself is calming as well. So, and then by writing it on the paper, we're problem solving. We're not just having the stuff whirring around that we can't see in our head. It's at the back of our head, really. We don't even see it. It's just there. So by writing it down and writing it down as it comes, then we know exactly what's going on up there, and we can then lean into it. That's the way in which we can lean into it. That's leaning into your anxiety, facing it. And on paper, you can see exactly what's going on. And that's when you begin to problem solve and say, okay, which bit of this can I deal with? Which of this is really very manageable for me? And which bit of it is the bit that, I really need to just come to terms with and accept and learn to manage myself with. And so that helps to divide the two things together. And again, that helps us to feel more in control as well, because we are problem solving.
Yeah, yeah, that is true because you're taking, the control over yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And you had mentioned that it is going to cause some physical symptoms
Mm-hmm.
with the anxiety and the thoughts that go on in our head. So, can you tell me how the thoughts in the head cause the physical symptoms?
Well, those, I guess, are stress, at the end of the day. If we are anxious, of course, it's all those biological responses that we get to fear. I'm being threatened, so it is the heart palpitations. It is the sort of racing heart that comes in. And then, of course, people feel it in different ways. There may be even sort of stomach aches, maybe. We have different ways of dealing with stress. And so then, of course, that's people's different sort of ways of dealing with stress kick in. So for some people, it may be that their sleep pattern is affected. In other ways, it may be that they start to feel stomach aches, or maybe just tightening of the chest, or their breathing becomes difficult. And even sweating, all of those kind of things are sort of the immediate way of not being able to focus on things as well is another thing too. People are feeling unsettled and not being able to, and it can go on and on really in terms of the physical symptoms as well. Cravings for things, all sorts of it. It just depends on, what other things. And of course, long-term anxiety can of course lead to more physical symptoms that are more severe. Of course, heart disease, all of these kind of things are related to stress as well.
Okay. All right. So, does positive thinking or positive affirmation is that any help during this time to kind of cope with the situation?
It definitely does. That's a part of the reframing. That's a part of the getting things into perspective, which again helps us to sort of be more in control, ground us, and help to clear our head as well from all of the stuff that's up there. So having a positive attitude, the gratitude, all of that does. But again, if that's all we're doing and we're not really, it needs to be meaningful as well. Sometimes just telling yourself that if your problem is actually more, then then really that's only going to be limited. Just the same as deep breathing is a great way to calm yourself down, and it really is. And you can use it as often as you want during the day. It's great whenever. But really, if the source of your anxiety is more severe, it's not going to deal with it long term. It is just a way to manage that. It's like putting a band-aid on it for the time being or whatever. So certainly all those gratitude, positive thinking is real. But if the underlying source of your anxiety is more deep, then it's going to be harder for you to believe yourself and use that every single time. But definitely it is also a way to develop a different relationship to life as well, which is all important too.
Yeah, that's where you said that's the reason to understand the root cause of that anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
why you're anxious, what's making you anxious. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what you were suggesting. Put it down on paper to kind of understand, kind of getting into the root cause of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, leaning in and seeing where is this all really coming from.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for that
You're welcome.
great advice into shifting yourself into a different way of thinking and adjusting to this uncertain times, and
Mm-hmm.
um, so that how people can calm themselves and ground themselves. When parents do that, that helps children too.
Yeah, I mean, in the airplanes, they always say, for the parents, put your oxygen mask on first, and then deal with your children. And of course, then your mind's going to be clear. You're going to feel competent in dealing with your child. And it's the same thing with anxiety as well. Deal with your own anxiety, calm yourself down, get yourself in control first, because how can, otherwise all you're going to do is pass your anxiety on to your child, and then your child is not only dealing with their own anxiety, but they're also dealing with yours as well. So deal with yours first, and then of course, as they see you deal with your anxiety well, they learn. It's good role modeling for them to learn how to deal with their anxiety and problem solving and so forth as well. So you get a double benefit that way as well as the fact that you can actually help your child better when you are more in control than if you're not.
All right. Okay. Thank you for all the wonderful pointers that you have
You're
given us,
welcome.
and thanks for your time in joining us today.
Thank you. You're welcome. My pleasure.
As parents, it is important for you to know that your children are very, very resilient. But at the same time, you do need to keep an eye on them to see if they have any signs of anxiety, such as lack of sleep, lack of concentration, no appetite, and no energy, or they are just crying all the time, saying to you that they don't want to go to school. Keep an eye out for that and see if you can address those issues at home. If you're not able to help them, then it's always a good idea to go seek some professional help. And research shows that children can read their parents' anxiety and their stress level. So please sit down with your children and share with them what your feelings are and how you are coping them so that they can understand them and they will be able to handle their fear and anxiety as they see you're able to handle, then they can do the same. And do not forget to download the free checklist. It's a daily morning checklist for parents to go through prior to children going back to school in the morning. All right. I am your faith based holistic coach. Until next time, choose the right option